addressing the European Commission when you're submitting your proposal and when you will be executing an H2020 on EFC project? Well, these different issues that I've been sort of illuminating, I've been presenting as a headlines, they can be presented into 10 different aspects. And very briefly, I will be going through every one of these aspects, because I believe these are important aspects. Maybe your research is only important or is only in relation or can only be correlated with one or two or three of these aspects. But you need to be aware and you need to be able to provide a response for every one of these issues, because that's your ethics assessment of the project. So you're doing a research project, and your research project might be involved in a variety of different topics. Maybe it's touching upon some of these topics. Maybe it's touching upon all of these topics. Maybe it's touching upon only one of these topics, which means you have to provide an answer, and sometimes you have to verbalize, and again, this message that comes again and again, be explicit about it. Just verbalize. Verbalize. If you are involved in any of these issues, just explain why you think you are involved and what have you done to maintain all these ethics standards in this particular aspect of your research project. If you think your project has nothing to do with any of these aspects, also be explicit about it. And in some cases, if through the ethics check or through the ethics screening, if the committee involved will say, well, you need to be elaborating a bit more your response. Let's say, people will say dual use. You might say, our research is nothing to do with dual use. Well, I'm sorry, this is not enough. This is not enough. Because even if you don't think it's going to be realistic, you have to be aware that there might be some implication from dual use. You have to put yourself in the worst scenario, in the worst situation, particularly when you're considering the misuse. You have to put yourself in the worst of the problems that can happen associated with your development. And if that would happen, what would be your reaction, or what could you do to prevent this malevolent use from really taking place? And I'm sure you could do things about it. And we will be referring to this, but let's say you are preparing a technology that can have a malevolent use. Well, this is not a technology that you are describing in very greater details and you are publishing in your Facebook page, right? This is something that has to be some level of containment, and you need to be careful about how and the way you are disseminating this information, because you are responsible for this. Or you are preparing a viral particle, again, because you are studying influenza virus. And you have a very nasty influenza virus in your lab. Well, you cannot have these viral particles simply in standard freezer. Well, you need to have them under different levels of security. Not only with the key associated with the corresponding freezer, but preventing access to anyone that is not involved into the research. So you always can do things to improve. Of course, there's always people that will be breaching and will be breaking into, but at least you have to be as reasonable as possible. You have to impede, you have to prevent this from happening. So let's start one by one, and I'll be providing some examples in some of these issues. And basically this is how you address the ethics issues, the ethics assessment in any research project that is going to be funded by the European Commission. These are things that might be interesting to you. The dual use that we already talked about. Well, believe it or not, your research might have military applications. It doesn't mean that you thought that they will be, but if there are, you need to be aware of. And if you haven't thought on this, you need to think on this, on these issues. And you need to think how you're going to be reacting, how you're going to be responding to this potential military application. Maybe you are not interested. Maybe this is nothing that you will be doing in your research project. But since there is this underlying possibility, you need to be aware of this. So you need to be aware that your research might contribute to the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Maybe this is totally out of your mind, but all of a sudden what you're doing might end up contributing to this. If that is the case, you need to be explicit about this, and you need to be declaring not only your opinion, but also what are the measures you're going to be adopting to prevent this from happening. Especially when this technology can have a dual application, there are some specific regulations you have to follow, and the export license that are required, they are very specific, and you need to get them before you can involve this military subcontractor, which doesn't mean that you cannot establish links with the military industry. This is welcome. Your focus of your research must be civilian, but if there is an application that can also be used for the military world, it is welcome. You have to be explicit about it, and you need to be aware of it, and you need to get the appropriate permissions. An example, so you're developing these Galileo satellites for communications. Well, the Galileo, it's clear, it's a civilian applications because they are intended to improve the current GPS satellites that we're using. It's clearly a benefit for all of us. So we will be getting a better connections with our cell phones, but also it is also obvious that these are positioning tools that can also have a very specific application for the militaries. So you need to take this into account, which doesn't mean that you have to stop doing research in this Galileo world. You still have to do a lot of research in the Galileo world. You simply need to be aware, and you need to accept that this research that you consider to be only civilian can have this dual implication. And why is that? Because in H2020, the only research that will be funded is the one that has an exclusive focus on civil applications, because that's the only one that will be eligible for funding. So you explicitly, you cannot have a research which you expect to be funded by H2020 that will be developing a better weapon. I mean, you cannot get this funded. But perhaps there might be some dual use, maybe perhaps you can have some military partners or subcontractors that can be involved, because there are dual use technologies, as we just discussed. We just discussed this thing with the satellite communication, so maybe that's your case with the batteries that you are developing. The batteries can have a lot of applications in the civilian world, but also I'm sure they will be appreciated by the military world. I mean, as long as your research has a clear focus on the civil applications, you are okay. I mean, that's the point. Okay, finally, misuse. Well, your research, maybe you haven't thought of this, maybe you did not consider this, but can have a potential to be misused. And this is including not only your topic, but also the materials, the methods, and the knowledge that you are generating. Because it can be applied for malevolent criminal or terrorist use. And it can be applied to harm humans, animals, or the environment. It can end up in the wrong hands. It can serve purposes which are other than those that you intended. That's clear. Nobody's telling that you are thinking about this misuse. Simply, the technology, the science, the materials, the reagents, the resources, the knowledge that you are developing can end up in the wrong hands. So, what you can do with this? Well, you need to be aware, again, you need to be explicit about this, you need to conduct a risk assessment, you have to fulfill, of course, the legal requirements at the national, European, international level, and you have to take all measures to prevent this misuse from happening. So what can we do for all these different issues that I've been kind of summarizing in these very basic principles of ethics? Well, my recommendation is you need to get help, because you don't have to be an expert in this issue. You're doing a research that has some ethical implications. you need to be adhering to these ethical regulations, to these ethical standards, which means first you need to get help and advice from your institutional ethics experts and committees. If not present, you need to seek them at external level. Perhaps you need to appoint an ethics advisor, and this is a very good thing to do. Maybe the complexity of the project, it's not enough with having an ethics advisor. You need to organize an ethics advisory board, a group of people that will be monitoring your research activities. This is nothing wrong with this. It can only be doing good to your project, because it's going to be telling you whether you always are on the safe side, whether you are always undertaking your research activities following the European ethics standards. And also these boards or these advisors, they can write reports that will be confirming that you are adhering during all the different activities, during all the different work packages of your research, and you've been following these ethical standards that you expected to follow.